Good evening. Today, we journey through the life of Cleopatra VII of Egypt, through the eyes and words of her most trusted servant, Charmion. If this bedtime story suits you, tap the like button once, but gently. We have a queen to keep alive. Toss the channel a subscribe if you haven't already done it. And tell me in the comments what part of the world you are from, so the rest of the world can wish you a good night's sleep. I hope you truly love the stories I share with you all here. Now, let's begin. Good evening. Today, we journey through the life of Cleopatra, the 8th of Egypt, through the eyes and words of her most trusted servant, Charmion. If this bedtime story suits you, tap the like button once, but gently. We have a queen to keep alive. Toss the channel a subscribe if you haven't already done it. And tell me in the comments what part of the world you are from, so the rest of the world can wish you a good night's sleep. I hope you truly love the stories I share with you all here. Now, let's begin. The linen has barely cooled from the last body to sweat through it, and already you have been chosen, plucked, really, from the human marketplace of Alexandria and slid into history like a bead onto a thread. You are Charmion. You are breathless, barefoot, and ridiculous with luck. You are about to become Cleopatra's personal attendant, which is like becoming the wick to a lamp. You will burn so she can shine. Tonight's story is the lullaby you don't get because there is no sleeping where the world ends and begins in the same woman. Alexandria at dawn smells like salt, fish, and boiling ambition. You rise on a pallet so thin your shoulder blades remember the floor, your head cushioned by a carved wooden headrest that pretends to be a pillow and fails with supreme confidence. Very ancient, very ergonomic, very who needs memory foam when you have memory pain. You splash your face with cool water from a faience jug, and the shock snaps your eyes. Blue smoke of kyphi still ghosts the room from last night, that sacred perfume made of honey and wine, raisins and resin, frankincense and cinnamon. A little bit temple, a little bit funeral, a little bit, please don't let me meet a Roman before coffee. You are brought to the palace like produce, inspected, turned, compared, because Cleopatra trusts almost no one, and you might be no one, which is the safest someone to trust. The palace is Ptolemaic drama, Greek columns that think they're better than the Nile, mosaic floors where dolphins leap on stone seas, gold leaf clinging to everything the way gossip clings to power. The air is cool and damp under the high beams, servants thick as bees, scribes, eunuchs, guards, the sacred pet menagerie padding and blinking. And always the Nile breathing out through the open colonnades, a river that is, let's be honest, just a very dignified flood with excellent PR. First rule, your hands are instruments. They pour, grind, anoint. They braid Cleopatra's hair and unbraid the slander braided into it. They measure the day in touch, olive oil, unguent, water. There's a coal pot, ground galena black as midnight, and a delicate bronze applicator you have to respect like a knife. Cleopatra is not yet in the room, but her presence is, like a panther's shadow. She's the kind of woman whose absence takes up more space than your whole family. You stand with the other attendants, older Marden, who knows everyone's secrets and keeps them like coins under his tongue. Iras, who moves quiet as a cat and looks at your sandals like she can tell if you're a climber by the dirt under your toenails. And those who were children when Ptolemy XII still played king and flute, and who remember how quickly favorites combust. You are given your kit, a linen cloth bleached white as teeth, a palm fiber brush for dusting, a string of amulets you will not wear but will keep near in case the day becomes metaphysical, which it will, almost immediately. Cleopatra enters as the sky wakes, white linen hugging her like a decision, hair coiled under a net, heavy with scented oil. Jewelry that speaks fluent grammar in gold. The kohl rim makes her eyes not larger. No, that's lazy, but more specific, like they were drawn for a courtroom sketch. Exhibit A. The defendant is the sun. You bow so low your back makes an opinion about monarchy. She says nothing. You are suddenly very aware of your breath and how cheap it smells compared to kyphi. Your name is pronounced Charmion, unlike it's been polished. You're told that trust is earned in grains, lost in bushels. Cleopatra smiles and the room tilts, because this is the smirk of someone who keeps a library and an army in the same skull. You will sleep near her chambers. You will learn her rhythms, the morning petitions, the midday judgments, the night games of diplomacy, mathematics, ritual. You will adjust the pillows when she reads the Odyssey and the Ship of Sorrow and texts of Hermes Trismegistus. You will fetch figs. You will handle letters sealed with green wax and a little snake pressed into it like a private joke. You will learn the taste of empire's dust. The daily grind starts with the body. The queen bathes warm water with natron to lift the city off her skin. You pass her the bronze mirror, imperfect enough to flatter. You bring the alabaster jars, each with its scent. Lily for mornings, myrrh for meetings, kyphi for nights that feel like ceremonies. She prefers linen that brushes the ankle, hates sandals that clack. You tighten the girdle, smooth the pleats, dust a little malachite green along the lids when a softer look is called for. Black when she wants the Senate of Rome to imagine night. You dab the wrists, throat, behind the ears, a pattern any priest would recognize. Breakfast is democratic. Bread. Barley bread, sometimes wheat bread, depending on the Nile's mood and tax grain. Goat's cheese with an attitude. Olives wide awake with brine. Dates that put the sun on your tongue. The occasional fig if the tree gods are smiling. And watered wine, because it is both civilized and survivable. Cleopatra eats quickly and with intent, like a general feeding a horse, and you will learn to do the same because time is another animal to saddle. Meanwhile, the petitions queue. Farmers whose crops drown too early or too late. Merchants who insist a tariff is an insult to their ancestors. Priests who would like a little more gold leaf for Horus's right eyebrow. Bureaucrats who want permission to invent a new stamp so they can stamp it on their careers. You stand at Cleopatra's shoulder and watch. She calculates with priestess calm, flood level, storehouses, Roman grain demand. How many ships must actually arrive in Ostia so that famine remains a rumor and not a headline scratched on a wall? She understands that the Nile's silt is half of her power and the other half is spectacle. You hand her papyrus. You take away the reed pen when the nib splits. You whisper a name when she snaps her fingers once, twice. Thrice the rule of three that organizes chaos. You clean. Queens shed problems like cats shed hair. The bed is low, cedar-framed, lashed with webbing that squeaks like honesty, stacked with linen that pretends to be clouds but is frequently stormy with politics. You air it each day, salt-laundered sheets in Alexandria's breeze, the scent of lotus and fish and frankincense smearing across the morning like kohl across a cheek. You sweep the mosaic with a palm broom. You polish the bronze lamps until they catch fire, even when unlit. You check the serpentine amulets, the poppet of protection with a crocodile snout, the little alabaster head of Isis that watches from the shelf with exquisite judgment. Food keeps arriving, because power is a stomach with paperwork. There's grilled mullet for lunch when the fishermen report good winds, roasted goose on feast days when Apis is satisfied, honey cakes when the palace remembers it has bakers, pomegranates falling open like red laughter, and cheap beer for the men who carry things, and expensive unmixed wine for the people who pretend they carry ideas. You learn to cut fruit the way a priest cuts offerings, precise, gentle, without the mess of a butcher or the greed of a child. Authority. Cleopatra uses it like eyeliner, sharply, where it will be seen. She speaks 9 languages, which means she can make friends or enemies in exactly the tone they deserve. When Julius Caesar first rolled in like a tuxedo made of legionaries, you were there to pretend to adjust a bracelet while the queen weighed him like a coin. You were there to see the famous rug trick carpet, sack, burrito of destiny, call it what you like. You helped hide the knives of thought in the folds of fabric. You smelt the sweat of a gamble. You watched the old men of the court gape salt-dried fish in human form. Caesar was a storm and Cleopatra was a shore that refused to erode. You made their bed. You poured their wine. You lit lamps around their conversations, all golden with politics, soft with Latin endearments that sounded like legal clauses. You learned how a queen makes an empire moist-eyed, soft wrist, hard mind. Rome called it scandal. You called it breakfast. Little Caesarion arrived a son's name that was also a telegram. You held him, warm and scroll new, and he gripped your finger like a promise the gods would later annotate in blood. Daily life kept grinding, because even golden myths deposit laundry. There were the taxes grain measured in metatai, recorded by men whose ink dried in suspicious shapes, collected by overseers who smiled too much. You took notes while Cleopatra checked the numbers, and you watched the math weigh heavier than jewelry. You saw the tax barges croak upriver like fat frogs, escorted by men who could recite tariffs like poetry. You heard the farmers whisper that Rome eats in straight lines, while Egypt eats in circles, and you wanted to draw a circle around your queen that no Roman geometry could invade. You learned her temple ways. On festivals, you guided Cleopatra to Isis's precinct, where the air tasted like bronze and incense, where the sistrum's rattle shook your bones into pattern, where Nile water shone in bowls, and priests sang to the mother of magic. You brought offerings, bread cut diamond sharp, lotuses still wet with river memory, honeycombs dripping like a promise of summer, gold leaf so thin it might be the skin of a god. Cleopatra, wife of the 2 lands, sister of she who births the sun, raised her hands, and you felt night lift like a veil. Ritual was not theatre. It was plumbing for luck. But under the perfume, rot. Family, that tender knife collection. Ptolemy XIII, brother-husband, boy-king, wrapped in tutors and paranoia, glared with adolescent thunder. Arsinoe's sister, with a mouth like a scorpion, perhaps practiced her smiles in a mirror that cracked from effort. Later, Ptolemy XIV, another brother-husband, smoother, duller, a 2-handled vase you can carry anywhere until someone drops it. The Ptolemies kept their blood pure by keeping their mirror close, and it made love a family meeting with knives under the napkins. You learned to set tables where people could never reach each other's throats without knocking over the god cups. Hygiene, which for queens is ideology. You oiled Cleopatra's hair with moringa and castor, combed it with a boxwood comb as patient as a scribe. You manicured her nails with a bronze file, buffed with linen, rubbed cuticles with scented grease. You mixed depilatory paste for legs and arms, natron, lime, salt, and waited while it hissed at hair. You brought pumice stone for heels, because even queens have feet that argue with sandals. You measured her cosmetics, kohl for shade and glare, red ochre to ghost the lips, crushed carmine when she wanted the Senate to imagine fruit. You kept a little arsenic around as a rumor, not for beauty, for endings. Work was a labyrinth with no thread, only memory. You scheduled nights like campaigns. Some were for philosophers and doctors with scrolls thick as loaves. Some for harpists and poets who bent verse until it confessed. Some for taxmen who wanted to be poets and could only rhyme grain with pain. You stood behind Cleopatra's chair and watched her turn Rome into conversation. After Caesar died, stabbed like a capon on a feast day where the gods refused to eat, your queen changed her sleep. She learned to speak with ghosts and messengers, to build safety out of silk and rumor. You lit lamps later, you refilled cups slower. You learned that grief is ritual that never ends on time. Then Antony, Mark Antony, who arrived like a pantomime of Mars, double-fisted glory and debt, a veteran of too many miracles and too few accountants. Cleopatra met him on a perfumed barge, so baroque it turned the river into a gossip column. Purple sails like bruises, oars flashing like fish. Servants dressed as little cupids without labor protections. Silver everywhere like a moon had shattered and been carefully glued to everything. You adjusted her veil and thought, we are going to drown in spectacle or make spectacle float. Either way, keep the kohl steady. Antony delighted in three things: victory, theatre, and whatever Cleopatra was thinking just now. You arranged their evenings, hunting parties that came home with more stories than meat, banquets where whole boars grazed on tables, drinking games with rules that felt like legislation, feasts where the air smelled of cinnamon and conquest, the famous pearl dissolved in vinegar. You saw the way Cleopatra toyed with extravagance like a cat toys with a beetle. You saw the ledger in her eyes, even when the table looked like Olympus's pantry. The palace whispered about sexual fetishes, as palaces do when men with swords feel outsworded by a woman with a library. They called her hungry. They called her witch. They called her Isis. You knew the truth of the bed. It is where alliances exhale. You also knew the truth of the mornings after, hangovers and policy. You aired the linens that knew more secrets than priests. You folded sheets that had hosted treaties. You pried pearls out of plates. You counted cups. Escalation arrives like floodwater, first as kindness, then as habit, then as force. One year, pick any, they all bleed. The Nile sulks low. The Shadoof creaks like an old man's knee. Water jars clink with hollow optimism. Fields look at the sky like wives who have run out of patience. Grain shrinks. Taxes do not. Rome's hunger stays the same because Rome's stomach is a law. You accompany Cleopatra to Phaeum, to Memphis, to villages that count wealth by goats and prayers. You watch her touch cracked hands. You watch her curse a scribe so soft he thinks he's being blessed. You feel the thinness of children like papyrus under your palm. You sleep, some nights, with your hand on a granary ledger, the way a mother sleeps with a child, just to feel the rise and fall of hope. Then illness. Antony, dear hammer-headed Antony, returns from a skirmish with fever snapping at his spine. The physicians swarm. The priests drum, the courtiers rehearse new loyalties, and you, Charmion, arrange a sick room like a battlefield. You boil willow bark and pour it down a throat that has swallowed worse. You burn kyphi until the air is thick enough to chew. You lay wet linen on a brow built for helmets. Cleopatra sits and stares at nothing, which is the only time she looks small. Her hand in yours is the weight of the state. She does not cry, because crying is for after the messenger has gone. You hold the bowl, you wait until the fever breaks like a wave smacking a rock, and then she exhales a century. You fall in love, secretly and in passing, not with a person, too risky, but with a ritual. The morning moment when Cleopatra pulls the net from her hair and the coils break like sun over water. Your chest aches with loyalty, that dangerous perfume. You become a believer in the temple of her competence. You also hoard little bits of skepticism, the way a squirrel hoards dates. What if the gods are drunk? What if Rome sobers up? Enemies multiply like bread mold. Octavian, smooth, serrated, a boy who sharpened himself on Caesar's name, writes letters that feel like hands in your pockets. He calls Cleopatra a witch, Antony a fool, Egypt a jewel that would look better in his crown. You help seal replies in green wax with that little snake stamp, and you think about symbols, how quickly a cobra becomes a noose. You count ships. You inventory spearheads. You oversee the storage of sailcloth so precisely that if a single bolt goes missing, you wake at midnight with its absence in your throat. Children laugh in corridors that feel like equations. Caesarion, the boy who glows with maybe, reads geometry under a fig tree and looks at you like you could solve problems with jam and a nap. The twins with Antony, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, toddle and tumble, the boy already trying to colonize furniture. The girl watchful and luminous like a little moon with opinions. Later, Ptolemy Philadelphus arrives, small and serious, a fist of future. You fix toys. You fix hems. You fix a crown that keeps sliding off a forehead because crowns are headstrong. Zoom out for a breath that smells like ink. This was normal, if normal means a culture held together by pageantry, math, and grain. Cleopatra is not a myth in your hands, she is policy. Historians will write that she spoke to subjects without interpreters, which mattered in an Egypt ruled by Greek tongues and Egyptian gods. They will say she understood that the Nile could be predicted by measuring the flood marker at Elephantine, that the harvest must be scheduled as precisely as a campaign, that Rome's bread dole turned Egypt's fields into a fuse. They will note, in dry lines, that coins show Cleopatra with a strong nose and firm jaw, less Hollywood, more hypothesis of power, that the image was a message compact enough to ride in a pocket. They will argue about whether she drank pearls or simply threatened to do so, missing the point that the rumor fed the exact beast it needed to feed. Roman envy, Roman fear, Roman appetite. You don't care. You remember the weight of the kyphi jar, the way her pulse steadied under your fingers when bad news came. You remember the smell of papyrus and pomegranate. You remember the day the messenger ran so fast his sandals tore. And now the high tide that does not recede, Actium, a name that tastes like metal. You pack chests with charms and letters, with children's sandals and royal seals, with a small statue of Isis that you wrap 4 times in linen because even gods can bruise. You help Cleopatra into armor that looks like a dress. The ships go out, sails fat with hope and argument. You stand on a deck that lifts and drops, and you learn that the sea does not care about your lineage. The battle is smoke and noise and heat beating off bronze like applause. Then it is confusion, then it is decision. Cleopatra runs, Antony follows. You strip the deck like a housewife stripping a bed after fever. You tear down purple, you hide documents under fish barrels. You count the surviving men in a voice that sounds like prayer. Back in Alexandria, you do what women always do after men fight. You make lists. Food, oil, bandages, rumors. You move the children through corridors like precious contraband. You keep the palace smelling like victory long after victory has moved out. Antony returns with eyes like stones that didn't ask to be polished. Cleopatra meets him with a face that can host any emotion for exactly as long as it's useful. They build a last kingdom of gestures, feasts like wakes, bravery like theatre, love like a will. Octavian comes. He is smaller than your fear and bigger than your stomach. He sends messages. He spreads rumors. He catalogues your city like a thief making a shopping list. Antony, finally done, falls on his sword and misses the good part. They carry him to Cleopatra. This room, this bed, this smell of myrrh and math, where he bleeds on linens that once held a better future. You hold the basin. You hold Cleopatra's shoulders when they shake the tiniest amount, the kind of tremor an empire would miss if it were not currently holding its breath. He dies, heavy and embarrassed, and you understand that love is a kind of taxation after all. Cleopatra chooses her ending the way she chose her perfumes, deliberately, with experience, with a sense of history as a witness you can invite or exclude. The snake, was it an asp, a prop, a story that bit the historian's ankle first, arrives like an actor late to a tragedy who still lands the best lines. You prepare the room, fresh linen always, because death deserves a new sheet. Kyphi, thick and sweet, because if you must die, die inside a hymn. The little basket, the figs that taste like summer trying to bribe autumn to wait, the slender animal coiled like a question mark the gods will punctuate. You place a diadem on her head, gold, snake, pressure. You hold her gaze while the animal decides. There is a pinch, a breath, a bloom of sleep. You lower her to the cedar. You have never been so gentle. Caesarion does not survive Rome. Selene will be taken to grow like a transplanted tree, foreign soil, surprising fruit. The coins are melted. The seals are broken. The palace inventory acquires your queen the way a list acquires a lamp. You are asked questions by men who think truth is a stick. You invent answers. You hide a lock of hair where only you can find it, behind the amphora of kyphi that has outlasted every headline. You sleep at last, on a pallet that remembers you, under a ceiling that does not. The Nile sighs. It is late. The lamps have burned low. Your hands smell like honey and ash. You are Charmion, and in the end you served a queen who understood that history is makeup that does not wash off. If you are lucky, your sleep will be thick and dreamless as the mud left by the flood. If not, you will hear the soft rattle of the sistrum and know that somewhere, even now, a temple is opening its doors to morning. Close your eyes. The river will keep moving. The grain will sprout without you. The gods, fussy, bored, magnificent, will judge with their usual laziness. And if the night asks you what you learned, say this: a bed can be a throne, a mirror can be a map, and a servant's hands can hold a world without dropping it. You keep waiting for the sound. Not trumpets, those belong to arrivals. Not the sea, too honest. You wait for the thin bite of a stylus on wax tablets, the scratch of an empire turning a queen into a case file. It comes at dawn, neat as a haircut. Octavian's secretaries, thin men with straight spines and allowable souls, inventory the world, one inked breath at a time. They touch nothing with their hands. They touch everything with their lists. You stand nearby, smelling of kyphi and linen starch, and discover there is a new rank below servant, witness. They ask where Cleopatra's jewels are. You think, on every rumor in Rome. Aloud, you say, where they always were, on the altars, in the treasuries, in the accounts that do not tremble. They ask where Caesarion is. You do not answer because you are too busy remembering him at 7, at 10, at the age when boys imagine their spines are made of iron and find out it is sugar. You sent him south with fast horses, steady hands, and prayers that ran faster than both. You smell the lie before it arrives. Mercy for a boy whose existence is an argument. Rome does not collect arguments, Rome deletes them. Octavian does not sweat. That, more than the soldiers, terrifies you. Men who kill with swords are weather, you can dress for them. Men who kill with paperwork are climate. He is small the way a knife is small. He is charismatic the way a tax code is charismatic. He is the opposite of Cleopatra's warm mathematics. He steps into the room where she died, looks once, and you can see his mind stamping the scene. Paid. A servant, this is almost funny, offers him dates. He declines. Honey is for the living. There are rites to perform. Death is admin. Nobody tells you that when they train you to fold linen so tight it hums. You and Eros wash Cleopatra's body. Our motions a catechism. Water, natron, oil. Hair unbound, rebound. Jaw closed with linen. Eyes sealed with 2 thin coins of malachite. Not for passage. Egypt does not pay the river that way, but for beauty even the gods respect. The embalmers arrive with their cedar oil and their knives, their calm that insults grief. They speak in the grammar of forever: remove, dry, fill, wrap, paint. Cleopatra is Greek to Rome, Egyptian to herself, both in your hands. You choose every amulet with petty exactitude, the dade for the spine, the was for power, the heart scarab for truth, the 2 little sisters for the throat that sang law. You lay them like punctuation at the end of her sentences. The tomb is a secret argument with sunlight. You help build it with bribes more than bricks, because Octavian wants a queen buried and a story displayed. He will keep her death. He will parade her life. You walk the workmen through the path the cortege will take. Less mud, fewer eyes, and pay the stonecutters with bread and silence. Antony joins her, heavy with the last thoughts he never had. You lay them together according to the old geometry. Head to west, feet to east, faces turned to face the sun's work. You brush dust off Antony's cheek with the same cool tenderness you used to brush crumbs from his tunic when he declared another victory in the courtyard over a stubborn olive pit. Death is an editor without taste. You do what you can. The priests of Anubis chant over the resin. The hall smells like pine and eternity. You place a diadem on Cleopatra's brow. Again. The cobra rears from metal with a confidence you envy. A scribe reads out a list of titles lick by lick, each one a towel drying the queen for her next life. She owned languages. She owned the weight of a glance. She owned the way a city's breath changed when she entered a room. You wonder what use a title is where there is no grain tax. You hope the gods have a different economy. After Rome performs its own ritual, stripping, statues go bare, inscriptions are scraped like burned bread. The library guards hide their favorite scrolls the way a child hides sweets from a greedy uncle, too obviously. The lighthouse, Pharos, the city's second sun, still licks light along the sea at night, and you relish the pettiness that Octavian cannot confiscate it. He can take names off stone, confiscate ships, throttle temple stipends until the priests bleat like goats, but he cannot make the sea forget the path to Alexandria. That belongs to the moon. You must live. This is the part history cuts. It prefers you dead, embalmed with a sassy quote, a neat end note. But your feet are loud with blood. Your back still remembers how to bow. You move through the city like a rumor that refuses to conclude. The palace assigns you to linens, of course, grief stains, but the work is arithmetic. You can do blind, wash, beat, rinse, soak, wring, fold. Your hands learn Rome's soap. It does not lather, it apologizes for froth. You inventory what survived. 2 alabaster jars, hair oil that smells like summer's armpit, a bronze mirror with a dent that makes a face into a question, 3 reed pens, a nib sharp as an accusation. The kyphi jar remains, miracle, because it looks like any fat-bellied thing, and men do not imagine power comes in brown. You sleep with it under your pallet for a month, then in a hollow in the wall, then in the temple of Isis behind a stack of hymnals that are too boring to move. Iras says it keeps your dreams sweet. You tell her it keeps your tongue. Both can be true. Rome does what Rome does, converts Egypt into a number. The grain ships multiply like silverfish. The Annona, the Roman bread dole, swallows your harvest with professional appetite, while the overseers measure your size for taxable moisture. New clerks learn old words, arura, medimnos, obol. The farmers learn new punishments, fines that take a goat, beatings that take a season, prison that takes a son's wedding. The irrigation dikes still hold, the shadows still nod like old men. The flood comes, sulks, recedes. You watch the Nilometers, carved stairways where water writes its annual mood, and think of Cleopatra's hands on those stones, reading the future the way a physician reads a palm, science that pretends to be superstition, or the other way around. Octavian hosts a triumph in Rome. You do not see it, but witnesses return with mouths full of bile. An effigy of your queen, children in chains glazed with pity stamped into spectacle, a river of coin. The city roars, the city always roars. You imagine Cleopatra evaluating the procession the way she evaluated wines. Bouquet, finish, utility. She would have noted the irony. Rome celebrating a province it needs more than it admits. She would have counted the ships. She would have smiled like a doorway closing quietly. Selene leaves. The girl who listened to the moon by the window now becomes a dowry with ankles. You pack her little chest, ivory comb, silver pendant, linen that still smells of your soap, and pretend you are sending her to a festival. She looks back once, twice, thrice, the way you taught her to remember everything. And then you have only the sound of the ship's rope slapping the water, like the sea applauding an arrangement it did not write. Years later, word comes like a fig fallen from a cart. She is queen in Mauritania, married to a man with patience and a coastline, building cities that look like the children of 2 continents. You hold the rumor to the light and decide it is true enough to sleep near. Time teaches the body to be a museum. Your knees collect small revolts, your shoulders hoard weather, your hands beads of burn. You instruct younger attendants in the priesthood of ordinary things, how to fold the bed so it forgives, how to grind coal so fine it becomes night rather than dust, how to pour wine so it sounds like mercy. You make 3 rules. The rule of 3 is not superstition anymore. It is the last geometry you still trust. 1. Never gossip upward. 2. Never bleed where a clerk can count it. 3. Do not love anyone who can order a parade. There is a new governor, then another, then another. They are men who shaved their beards with ambition and now cut their teeth on your taxes. They travel with wives who snip at linen and say your soaps smell exotic. You think of Cleopatra's bath, lotus, myrrh, cedar, and taste the word exotic like undercooked bread. The wives complain about the heat, and you show them the headrests. They try them, laugh politely, and return to pillows, and you think and do not say, some discomforts are technologies. They remind you how much neck you have. The temple still works. On feast days, you rattle the sistrum until your wrist hums. The priestesses smear you with oil that tastes like clean thunder. You kneel before Isis and do not ask for anything. You thank her for the math that continues. Sun up, sundown, flood, seed, sprout, harvest, debt. You leave bread and honey because the gods have terrible diets. The Greek Quarter still stages plays, satyr comedies with jokes old when Homer was fresh, and you stand in the back and let laughter knit your ribs. In the harbour, sailors sing obscene songs that work like medicine. In the market, perfumers reinvent Cleopatra hourly. You do not correct them. Corrections are a tax that pays itself. Night work returns after a year. As if grief has a statute of limitations, the palace must still glow. There are banquets where Rome's new men pretend to be old gods. They lean on couches that creak like treaties. They talk about roads as if they invented the horizon. They eat dormice rolled in poppy and honey like sins rolled in sweetness. You refill their cups with watered wine civilization in a jug and think of the queen who taught you to tilt the pitcher so the stream is a ribbon, not a rope. You are so good at not spilling you could baptize a city. A memory visits like a stray cat. Cleopatra's kitchen of knowledge. Not a room, more an hours-long corridor full of voices. She would bring philosophers, physicians, mathematicians, charmers, navigators. One discussed the brain as a moist sponge trapped in bone. Another named stars with syllables that tanged like metal. Another spoke of glass and how to freeze fire into windows. Cleopatra loved questions with teeth. She would turn to you after a brilliant argument and ask, "What did you understand?" And you would say, "The shape." And she would say, "Good. Shape first, then color. You carry this in your apron like a personal god. Shape first, then color. It keeps your head from drowning in detail. It keeps the city from becoming just a smell of fish and taxes. You become keeper of small resistances. You teach the laundresses to whistle the hymn to Isis, soft, harmless, loaded. You show the kitchen boys how to hide a date or two for children who come to the back gate with eyes like questions. You bury a handful of wheat each planting season in a corner of the palace garden. For cats, you say, and the cats indeed show up. As cats do when someone says their name in a tone that implies food. You braid your hair in the old style on the old holidays, an extra coil laid like a memory across your crown. Every little action is a coin paid into a future you will not spend. Sometimes you dream in full sentences. The dreams are orderly, which is suspicious. In them, Cleopatra is not dead. She is in another room, adding columns of numbers until they become poetry. She calls Charmion, and you answer, yes. And the entire city exhales like a man who has been holding a weight he forgot to put down. You wake with the taste of fig on your tongue and realize it is resin from the embalming hall. You rinse your mouth with wine, spit, and laugh. Humor returns sneaking sideways, and once it finds the latch, it will try every door. You do, at last, take a lover. Not a man who matters in public, too dangerous. A scribe from the customs office who smells faintly of ink and lake water. He has a sweet hitch in his left shoulder, like a boat that remembers a storm. You meet him by accident in the papyrus market, trading complaints about the way new reeds tear when you sharpen them too fast. He looks at you like you could proofread his life. You look at him like he could staple yours to the present. It is not love like the poets sell. It is love like a bowl, useful, strong, holds hot things without cracking. You let him rest a hand on your back in crowds. You let him correct the names of obscure towns without flinching. You learn his worst day, and it is not a war. It is the day his mother's ring slid off into the harbour and was eaten by the sea. You tell him the sea is a greedy aunt. He laughs. He stays. With him, the city softens. You walk the Canopic Way at dusk, when the light makes even the tax offices look like temples. You buy honey cakes unstuck from their papers with a flourish. You watch rope walkers do physics in public for coins that smell of onions. In the gymnasium, boys grumble through their exercises as if muscles were a personal insult. In the Serapeum, Greek and Egyptian borrow each other's gods with exquisite bad manners. At the docks, crates are stamped with seals from places a storybook would call invented: Punt, India, Spain. The world arrives every day, and you learn to receive it with an eyebrow that means not impressed, and a heart that means grateful. There are stories, of course, about Cleopatra's bedroom, because men with small mirrors must invent larger rooms to look into. They say she kept a fish pond of perfumes, swam in donkey milk, wore a crown to sleep that gave orders to dreams. They say her lovers signed contracts in their own blood, promising to bring her new seas. They say she had a taste for men who could lose well. You tidy the stories like cushions. You keep 3 that are true enough to be funny and harmless enough to survive. She loved figs more than flattery. She read aloud to herself when anxious. She once hid a letter in a loaf of bread so well the recipient ate the geopolitical development. The baker was promoted. The recipient learned to chew slower. Your body ages into an opinion. Knees, no. Back, perhaps after wine. Hands, always. You are promoted sideways into the wardrobe vault, an armoire masquerading as an archive. Linen layers have their own climate. Gold thread tarnishes slower if you sing at it. Cedar boxes keep moths and men from ruining things. You count belts. You count veils. You count your breaths when the door shuts and the room smells like memory. Sometimes, you take the diadem out from its tray and consider the little cobra's shape. It looks less like death and more like punctuation, a question mark that finally chose an answer. You set it back in its bed with the tenderness of a mother returning a sleeping child to the right pillow. One winter the flood is perfect, not vicious, not petty, generous with boundaries. Wheat fattens like a choir. The poor smile with their eyes, which is the only proof you require that something has gone right. You go to the market and the prices do not bite. You throw copper after a juggler who is only average. You buy an orange for the color alone. Rome takes its share, of course, but you take yours first. A week of better soup, lentils that hum with cumin, leeks that snap. A goose, once oily, arrogant, delicious. You roast it with dates and vinegar and feed half the palace on a night when winter pretends to be serious and you remind it is merely a seasonal intern. Your scribe learns to sleep through your nightmares. You learn to tell a Roman clerk no without using the word. The cat adopts you violently, as only the aloof can. She is black, with a white dot on the nose, a punctuation cat, and she lives on your windowsill, pretending to ignore the world. You name her Kyphi because she makes everything better and more complicated. She kills 2 mice, 1 lizard, and an entire argument by sauntering through it mid-sentence and yawning. You indulge in 3 unwise habits. First, you keep a ledger of lies, not other people's, your own. Every day you write one lie you told, large or small, and next to it the tax you paid for it, a burned mouthful of honey, an extra psalm, a pinprick on the finger. Small worship, small atonement, the gods like accounting. Second, you visit Cleopatra's tomb on forbidden nights. You leave 3 lotus petals and a curl of smoke. You whisper an update about the market, the moon, your knees. Third, you hoard words. When a new phrase pleases you, papyrus fever, harbor's braid, governor's hiccup, you say it to the wall later and smile when it echoes clumsily. Language is a pet most people forget to feed. Sometimes the young attendants ask you what Cleopatra was really like. They expect scandal shaped like a wine cup. You give them work shaped like a list. She rose early, you say. She reviewed fields while brushing hair. She cut figs with a knife so sharp it made the fruit nervous. She never wore a perfume she could not pronounce. She told jokes so dry they turned to salt. She let silence do 8 kinds of labor. She liked to win by inches. She did not forgive arithmetic. She adored children the way farmers adore rain, grateful, wary, fully aware of what comes after. They ask about love. You tell them to rest their wrists when they mix kohl. They will live longer. They ask about Antony's shoulder. You say nothing and feel a small nation of muscles in your back. Recall how his weight felt on that last bed. They ask about Caesar, and you look at the lighthouse and say, men who make the world brighter are not always actually light. They ask what it felt like to be inside history. You say, scratchy. They laugh. You do not. One afternoon, sweeping the colonnade where fish-shaped shadows swim above your head, courtesy of the mosaicist who thought roofs should participate in conversations. You find a small wax tablet dropped by a courier. You smooth it. The writing is plain. Lists for the governor, ship counts, tariffs, repairs to the quay. Nothing scandalous, nothing romantic. You read the numbers aloud and hear Cleopatra in them, the music she loved. You pocket the tablet and later you do something wild. You teach a scullion to read the first 5 lines. He is 11 and suspicious. You tell him letters are seeds. He looks at you like you tried to sell him the wind. 2 months later he sounds out ship with a face like a sunrise. You pretend not to notice your heart finding a new place to sit. When the earthquake comes, it forgets to be generous. Walls shrug. Amphorae commit mass suicide. The harbour hems itself with froth and insult. A section of the library coughs up its top floor. People yell at the earth, which continues to be earth. You spend the day bandaging, counting, swearing. That night, with the aftershocks playing knucklebones under your bed, you dream of the lighthouse leaning down and whispering, I tire. You wake and promise to buy oil for the lamps at the Serapeum. You buy extra. The gods, like cats, love late gifts most. An inspector arrives from Rome to standardize your measures. His name is a stack of marble. His smile is dry bread. He brings new jars graded in the holy unit of Italian confidence. He orders your old jars burned. You nod, stack the new jars, label them with a neat hand, and secretly keep one old jar for kyphi. You swear an oath to retain the scent unstandardized. He will never know the civil disobedience hiding in your wardrobe, perfume in a rebel pot, a revolution that smells like raisins and night. You grow old enough to be thought wise, which is mostly a matter of silence applied with taste. People bring you questions. Will my husband stop gambling? Should I bribe the overseer? What does the temple do with all that gold? You answer as if holding a baby. Carefully, head supported. A little humor when they look like they might drop it. You say things Cleopatra would have considered efficient, A small bribe now prevents a large bribe later. Never bet on a man who prides himself on luck. Gods prefer bread to gold, they can eat bread. The city starts to call you mother. You privately prefer aunt. Aunts carry knives and cookies in the same bag. News travels like mold, silent, inevitable, everywhere when you finally look. Selene is building libraries by the Atlantic. Caesarion, your boy whose jaw turned stubborn at 14, is dead in the past tense you hated most. Passive. The twins? Alive enough to argue with their tutors. Octavian has rebranded himself Augustus, a name that sounds like a room with clean floors. A poet in Rome is writing lines sticky as dates about love and myth, and women who are not your queen but pretend to be. Ships carry verses back to Alexandria, where dock workers recite them with gestures that would earn them money in a different genre. One night you visit Cleopatra's tomb for what you know is near the last time. You bring the kyphi jar, now low enough to tell the bottom story. You bring a small loaf stamped with the palace seal, a ridiculous gesture you hope amuses her. You bring your scribe, because he has been the correct kind of witness, one who does not narrate while watching. You kneel, pour a curl of smoke, swear under your breath the way priests cannot, and say quietly enough that even a curious god must lean in. We kept it as best we could. A drop of resin falls, sizzles on the kohl, smells like an apologetic orchard. You rehearse your own death with the method of a woman who handled a queen's calendar. There will be a small fuss, you predict. Eris will cry in the manner of someone who learned at the skirts of a great mourner. The laundresses will pretend not to cry and fail. The scribe will sit on your stool like a man whose boat drifted off without him, and he does not yet know how to swim without splashing. You prepare a list. The cat to the girl with the missing tooth. The cedar comb to the boy who learned to spell ship. The kyphi jar to the temple with a note that says, "For nights that need remembering." You write and cross out, and write again, because sentences are a kind of folding. Before the end, a last inventory of senses. Bedding, cedar frame, rope slats, linen smooth as a priest's lie, the old headrest worn into admitting comfort, a single tear in the hem you left on purpose, a flaw for the gods to escape if they find the fabric too perfect and want to punish you for competence. Diet, simple, well-defended, barley bread, leeks, garlic, dates in winter, honey when you could. Fish, when the market had not learned greed that morning, a memory of goose fat that warms a room in your mind. Smells, salt breath of the sea, brick warm noon, sweat, human and horse, honest. Kyphi, of course, always kyphi, temple in a jar. Cedar and ink and oil, and the metallic sweetness of new coins. Blood twice, maybe thrice, and you held a bowl each time with terrible grace. Tools, palm broom, reed pen, bronze mirror, oil lamp with a chipped lip that never spilled, needle in a wrap of parchment, knife thin as a rumour and twice as useful, your hands, your hands, your hands. Taxes, always. Love life, enough. Romantic partners, a general who treated love like a campaign you could win by being loud. A dictator who treated love like a clause in a law. A scribe who treated love like bread, daily, necessary, best when warm. Sexual fetishes, gossip's favorite meat. You tighten your mouth at that and let it pass. The truth is, most people want to be seen, fed, forgiven, sometimes in that order, sometimes all at once. Enemies, a legion of men who thought conquering meant understanding, a handful of women whose mirrors hummed with war, a bureaucracy with infinite sandals. Siblings, Yours were kindness and skepticism. Cleopatra's were conspiracy and rehearsal. Children, Caesarion's laugh, Selene's moon-bothered eyes, Helios's tendency to climb furniture, Philadelphus counting everything like a priest. Temple rituals, the sistrum's rattle, hymns in a minor key that is somehow most major. Isis peeking from behind the curtain of incense like a beloved aunt who disapproves in a way that means bake more bread. Other aspects, the lighthouse remembering you when you walked past at night, the sea calling you by your fear and your first name, the city, always, being theatre and granary, oracle and fish market, womb and ledger, Alexandria, queen turned province, perfume turned inventory line. The end sneaks up on you like a well-trained cat. One moment it is a room, the next it is a lab. Your breath does what breath does at the border, counts, bargains, forgets what numbers are for. The scribe holds your hand like a sentence he does not want to end with a period. You want to joke, semicolon, then, but your mouth chooses better. You whisper to him the thing that kept you breathing when the air was politics, shape first, then color. He nods, which is ridiculous and perfect. He kisses your knuckles, which is both Roman and entirely his. The cat blinks, slow, kind. You let go of your posture and keep your dignity. If there is an after, it is administrative in the kindest way. A desk, a lamp, a pile of blank papyri, and a schedule with elastic hours. Cleopatra is there, naturally, not as a queen. Hierarchies bore the dead, but as a friend who still gets to the good part too fast and makes you chase her. She asks how the wine was under Rome. You say, watery. I learned to taste conversation instead. She laughs the laugh that used to make the guard at the west door drop his spear. Antony arrives late, still expecting applause. Caesar shows up with an agenda. You put them to folding linen. The gods look on, relieve someone else is handling logistics. History sighs, grateful that a woman with a comb is here to straighten the snarls. Back in the world with chairs, someone opens your ledger and reads your lies. They smile. Someone else finds the kyphi jar at the temple, unseals it on a night when the moon is a careful coin, and lets the sweetness invent a door in the air. A child you taught to sound out ship reads grain without breathing between letters. The lighthouse throws its long arm over the dark, and fishermen, who do not care about politics unless politics arrives dressed as a storm, steer home with the gratitude of hungry men. The market knocks its own loud heart against its ribs, and morning, unfazed, slides in through every unguarded window like a rumor you are glad to host. If you are up late listening to this in some distant century, a room lit by tame lightning, a bed that forgives every sin but insomnia, a world that pretends history is a documentary narrated by someone safe, lean closer. You are Charmion. You were the hands that braided Power's hair, the ears that measured the room, the eyes that knew the difference between shine and burn. You learned how to fold a life so it fit on a shelf without creasing the best parts. You slept on a headrest that kept the skull honest. You fed a city without spilling a drop. Close your lamps. Let the kyphi smoke loop, lazy as a cat's tail, over your pillow. Tomorrow, Rome will still be Rome. Taxes will still be taxes, and the Nile will still practice its yearly miracle of pretending to drown you so it can feed you. Tomorrow will need bread and jokes and a list. For now, make a small vow that requires no witness, to count what matters, 3 things: the hands that held you, the rooms that taught you, the names that deserve to be said out loud when the night thinks it won. Then sleep. The sistrum's rattle softens to a silver hush. The lighthouse yawns its patient cone across the sea. You are warm. The bed cooperates. The moon minds its work. The story lowers itself like a curtain woven of grain and gold, and the remains of a perfume that refuses to say goodbye. Good night, Charmion. Sleep well, you trusted soul. The next story is simple to state and nauseous to contemplate. Power that moves not only by parliament and parade, but by pillow and pamphlet. By whispers signed in the confessions and countersigned under the bedsheets. The year is 1846. 16-year-old Maria Isabel Luisa de Bourbon, also known as Queen Isabella II, is married to her cousin Francisco de Assis, the Duke of Cadiz. Disgusted by her marriage, Isabella reportedly commented later to one of her intimates, "What shall I tell you about a man whom I saw wearing more lace than I was wearing on our wedding night?" He promises a bedtime story and brings incense, gunpowder, and a faint odor of scandal, like opening a velvet-lined cabinet and discovering it hides a door to a firing range. The audience will endure, no, luxuriate in, the spectacle of Isabella II of Spain, who learned early that a crown in the 1800s was a migraine with jewels, and that in Madrid, the shortest corridor between chapel and cabinet ran straight through the royal bedroom. She arrives on stage swaddled in dynastic anxiety, the last thing Ferdinand VII's shaky line could produce, baptized in holy water and geopolitics, raised among nannies, beads and bayonets. The carless roar that a woman cannot reign. Lawyers quibble, priests intone. Generals polish sabers and wait to see which way the incense smoke leans. Spain in the 1,830 seconds is a cracked bell, beautiful, resonant, but with a hairline fracture running from altar to barracks. Isabella is a child queen gifted with an adult-sized crisis and a nation addicted to melodrama. She is promised a future of piety, prudence, and corseted decorum, and handed, instead, a stage set with opera cloaks, lace mantillas, and the perpetual percussion of pamphlets thudding onto cafe tables like moral grenades. The palace breathes in ceremonial air and exhales rumor. Floors creak under courtiers who walk tiptoe as if crossing a battlefield strung with tripwires. There is the smell of beeswax and old silk, orange blossoms in season, and the metallic tang of envy. Outside, Madrid clatters, hooves on cobbles, knives in kitchens, guitars, gossip, and God. Inside, Isabella learns that the Catholic monarch is expected to be a moral chandelier, radiant, immaculate, and simultaneously a switchboard where every faction plugs in its trembling wire. She is taught to cross herself correctly, to curtsy like a swan negotiating stairs, to sign papers she half understands, and attend masses that never end. She grows up, as queens do, with too many eyes on her and not enough honesty in front of her. Which brings him to the marriage, that cautious, ecclesiastically perfumed minefield. Francis of Cadiz, cousin and eventual husband, is presented as a Bourbon solution, a safe match that secures the bloodline, prevents a French coup by marriage, and keeps the Carlists muttering rather than marching. The official record says they wed in 1846 with the usual explosion of lace and Latin, a celebration engineered to reassure Europe that Spain would be traditional, tranquil, and boring on schedule. The unofficial record, which lives in cafes, broadsheets, and the mouths of people who never let facts obstruct a good story, smirks. It whispers that the marriage was a dynastic seatbelt on a carriage that had already lost a wheel. It sketches Francis as a man of delicate sensibilities and fewer enthusiasms, minus the one for regimented propriety. It notes that pamphleteers, those 19th century Twitter accounts printed on cheap paper, lob anatomically unkind nicknames like rotten fruit. Rumor, he notes, not verdict. Sources are often caffeinated, proofs are thin. But the gossip's volume becomes part of the political weather, and Isabella hears it rain indoors. He would like to say that love walked in at this point with clean boots and reasonable expectations. Instead, Spain did. Spain, with its cyclical fevers, moderates and progressives, altars and auctions, decrees and denials, each ministry like a soufflé collapsing if stared at. Isabella discovers that her daily grind is less queen on a balcony and more master juggler with rosary beads around the wrist. The throne requires signatures, smiles, and sacramental photo ops. The state requires stability. The court requires entertainment. And the generals require everything. Ramon Maria Narvaez, the iron-laced moderate who could stare a cavalry charge back into the stables. Leopoldo O'Donnell, the cosmopolitan curative who believed the right expedition could anesthetize a restless country. And Francisco Serrano, handsome in that uniformed way that suggests epaulettes were invented as shoulder scenery. All three orbit her, prime ministers like planets, each promising to steady the monarchy while tugging the tide of her reputation. He stresses the distinction between rumor and record with the air of a librarian at last call. Record. Narvaez and O'Donnell served her repeatedly, rotated like iron filings around a magnet, alternately propping and scolding. Record. Serrano rose meteorically, gathered decorations like a lint roller gathers confetti, and cultivated proximity so close the palace mirrors fogged. Rumor that Serrano's intimacy with the Queen exceeded ceremony, that some children looked more like promotions than baptisms, that a certain rhythm in the royal nursery matched the drumline of the officer corps. Spain being Spain, the debate was not, is it true, but which general? He assigns probabilities, not sentences, and reminds you that pamphlets have the nutritional value of sugared air. Still, sugared air, inhaled often enough, does something to the bloodstream. Her devotions remain. She is sincerely Catholic in the public way, to be sure, but also in the private rhythm of habit. Mass at hours that feel like punishments, reliquaries kissed as if they could bite, confessors receiving more state secrets than the diplomatic pouch. She processes under canopies while the crowd calculates. She funds chapels, craves absolution, and keeps scapulars tucked like structural supports. She is pious and opportunistic, sentimental and steel-cored, a paradox like an iron rosary, cold to the touch, surprisingly heavy. Religion as theatre? Certainly. Religion as refuge? Frequently. Religion as political technology? Absolutely. Incense blurs outlines, and blurred outlines help a queen survive until dinner. Meanwhile, the paperwork reproduces like rabbits. Decrees about railways, tariffs, and whether the army should be permitted to schedule coups as if booking opera tickets. Cabinets fall with the regularity of Lent. Spain invents the modern cabinet crisis like a hobby. Collect them, trade them, swap 3 for a short war. Narvaez storms in, slams shut the window of chaos, imposes order with a cavalryman's handwriting. O'Donnell arrives later with cologne and campaigns. Morocco, the romantic word on Spanish lips that year, promising victory, headlines, and a patriotic rinse. The Queen signs, prays, frowns, and smiles on cue. It is governance by pendulum, the palace like a clock that keeps excellent time, but not quite the right hour. And yes, there is the bedroom, because Spain digs its politics with a spoon that reaches across the table. The court fills with elegant men whose boots echo down corridors like preludes. The camarilla forms, ladies, confessors, courtiers, and that special class of functionary who seems to exist expressly to hold the Queen's shawl while whispering tactical advice. Isabella is generous with favours and ungenerous with boredom. She dislikes being handled by factions as if she were a ceremonial object. She prefers, no, she needs, to pick the hand that steadies her. Is that prudence? Preference? Defiance? A survival reflex in an ecosystem where generals treat prime ministry like a turnstile? He says yes to all of it, and notices how often in Spanish history the moral panic about desire sits neatly atop the practical panic about power. Now the escalation, or rather, the set of three ordeals, 3 stories to hold like wax tablets, soft enough to take an impression, firm enough to carry a message. First, the most prominent affair in the national imagination, Francisco Serrano, the general of the handsome profile, elevated to Duke of La Torre, as if titles could keep secrets. Record, he is in her orbit constantly, receives posts that suggest confidence more than coincidence, and later, when the revolution comes, stands center stage with an expression that says he has seen the script. Rumor that he fathered one of the children, that palace corridors believed it even when they shouldn't, that nicknames bloomed cruelly as chestnut trees in spring. He does not confirm paternity. He cannot. He notes only that gossip moved markets and ministries, and that Serrano's silhouette appears on more than battlefields. Second, the most scandalous, which is not always the same as the most probable, Enrique Puigmolto, a handsome guard with a name that broadsheets could not resist and a rumour that clung, particularly to the birth of Alfonso in 1857. Record, Puigmolto's closeness was noticed, cartoons sprouted like mould, the timing invited calculus. Rumour that Spain's future king owed his existence to a royal guard rather than a royal husband. He places this in the drawer, labelled often alleged, never proved, notes that the drawer is opened frequently for air, and observes how seamlessly satire can impersonate certainty whenever a monarchy requests privacy. He reminds the listener that historians are not midwives and should not pretend. Third, fetishes, the word used by pamphleteers who wanted to sell an extra 1,000 copies by breakfast. He refuses to stage manage the private with pornography. This is late-night edutainment, not a tabloid autopsy. But he admits the record of suggestion, the caricatures of a queen hungry for uniforms, the fetishization of power expressed as the power of fetish. Uniforms, yes. Guards, yes. The shimmer and clack of accoutrements in the half-light of a palace corridor, the scent of saddle soap and tobacco, Spain in a single inhalation. Was the queen aroused by power or by its costume? He suggests that in a court where the state wore boots and epaulettes, costume and power were the same garment. And if some of the cartoons add leather that never existed, well, history has always had a thriving fan fiction community. Between these tableaux, governance chugs along like a carriage with mismatched wheels, forward but with drama. The desamortización of ecclesiastical property advances. Rails lace the landscape. Industrial murmurs begin to irritate the ears of old nobles. There is wealth, certainly. Palace budgets fattened by tradition and by the archaic magic whereby royal treasuries refill themselves through patience, patronage, and not asking too many questions. There is also poverty, hunger that cannot be prayed away, strikes that do not need pamphlets to justify themselves. She doles out charity publicly, a rosary in one hand and a purse in the other. A scene painted in the precise colours that keep monarchies alive, just long enough to be inconvenient. In the domestic theatre, the royal nursery becomes a newsstand. Every birth is a referendum disguised as christening. Every godparent is a policy position. Children are named. Factions keep score. Isabella, who is also a person, displays affection, anger, exasperation, the human triad permitted to queens when the room is empty. She quarrels with Francis, reconciles with religion, and perfects the art of attending to a general's briefing with the expression of a woman enduring a tedious sermon. Marfori, the courtier with the talent for being exactly where influence condenses, becomes an indispensable door, no speculation required to say that proximity mattered. The husband, increasingly estranged, becomes a fixture and then a rumour, living in the palace but elsewhere, married in fact but not in romance. A prince consort whose title shines brighter than his presence. The national temperature returns to a boil in 1868. The Queen has outlasted ministries the way a cathedral outlasts scaffolds, but the scaffolds now walk around and shout. Economic anxiety bites, corruption becomes the chorus, even the incense smells like smoke before a fire. O'Donnell is gone, Narvaez is gone, the stage belongs to new men sharpening old knives. Serrano reappears, and with him Admiral Topete and a coalition diverse enough to terrify a census taker. Viva España con honra floats over the sea like a slogan carved into a cannon. The glorious revolution lands. Isabella, who began as a child queen defended by regents and generals, now becomes a middle-aged queen deposed by them. Her crown sliding off as a nation decides to change the lighting. She goes into exile in France, of course, the 19th century's spa for dethroned monarchs. Paris takes her in like a grand hotel that keeps a crown-shaped hat rack. She brings her piety, her taste, her stubbornness, and her habit of not letting reality ruin a good breakfast. She does not starve. Exiled queens rarely do. She does what European royalty does in exile, writes letters, negotiates futures, grows franker because she can, and keeps the faith that Bourbon threads are elastic, not broken. In 1870, she abdicates in favor of her son. Spain experiments with kings the way a baker tries new loaves, Amadeo, then none at all. When the Restoration comes in 1874 and Alfonso XII returns, it is as if the nation, exhausted by trying to live without a Bourbon, shrugs and orders the usual. He zooms out. The 1800s were an age in which monarchy and modernity attempted couples therapy. Across Europe, crowns learned that public opinion had moved in and was sleeping on the couch. Pamphleteering wasn't a hobby. It was the mass media of the day. In Spain, where the soldier and the priest shared custody of the nation's conscience, it was inevitable that politics would wear a uniform and morality would wear a cassock. Women in power, especially young queens, were judged by a scale calibrated by men who feared both female agency and national embarrassment. Isabella's so-called bedroom politics were neither unprecedented nor uniquely perverse. They were the feminine-coded version of the masculine deal. Influence traded where influence gathers. Louis XV had his parc aux cerfs. Catherine the Great endured fables constructed like catapults. Even Victoria, the paragon, was scrutinized for the reproductive schedule of her marriage, as if empire depended on a bedside calendar. 3 facts to anchor the fog. First, that Spanish political life in Isabella's era was militarized and unstable, with generals as necessary ballast. Second, that mass pamphleteering weaponized private rumor into public narrative. Third, that dynastic marriages arranged for politics often bred private disasters that then leaked into statecraft like water through antique masonry. He walks the listener gently toward the end. Isabella dies in 1904, remembered as excessive, pious, generous, foolish, resilient. Choose your adjective, then add its opposite, because queens are mirrors that reflect the onlooker. Spain will go on to larger tragedies and stranger experiments, as if the 19th century were merely stretching before a long run. Yet her legend persists. A queen whose bedroom was a cabinet, whose confessors doubled as spin doctors, whose generals took turns pretending to be constitutional furniture. She was not a heroine, she was not a monster, she was a Bourbon in an age allergic to Bourbons, improvising the way a singer does when the orchestra loses the sheet music. He leaves you with a postcard of sensory detail, the click of a mantilla comb as it is set in hair, the snag of lace on a ring, the waxy perfume of a candle extinguished by pinched fingers, a corridor after midnight where velvet swallows footsteps, a door half open on a room where state papers mingle with devotional cards, and a single officer's glove left like punctuation on an inlaid table. This was her office, this was her chapel, this was her fault, and this was her fate. If the moral is thin, the texture is thick. Power is a bed with terrible springs. Saints do not make good mattresses, and pamphlets, like today's comment sections, always assume they were in the room when history happened. Dim the lights. History, cheaper than therapy and noisier than prayer, will tuck itself in. He promised mercy and then remembered he was talking about Spain, where mercy is a line item and scandal is a sacrament. So he lingers, 3,000 words more, or as many as it takes to feel the beeswax on your fingertips and the pamphlet ink under your nails. On the machinery that kept Isabella II moving even when the floor was wobbling like an old stage. She begins small and surrounded. Maria Cristina, her mother, serves regency like a medicinal tea, soothing, bitter if oversteeped. Outside, muskets comment loudly. The First Carlist War creases the map, and a baby queen is the flag around which constitutionalists rally like nervous birds. Later, the regency passes to Espartero, the progressive idol with a general's carriage and a barber's appetite for trims. He governs with a paternal stare and a periodic fondness for bombarding a city to remind it that patience has limits. The child watches power as one might watch lightning through curtains, fascinated, frightened, memorizing the intervals. The court learns a delicate choreography. Step to the altar, pivot to the barracks, curtsy to the cortes, glide back to the nursery. Her adolescence is stitched with the thread of pronunciamientos, Spain's national pastime of announcing that the previous announcement has been cancelled. When she comes of age, the sewn-up futures are unpicked in a hurry. Suitors appear like a hat stand's worth of options. French princes with polite vowels, German specimens wrapped in genealogy. Archdukes who smell faintly of upholstery. And the Spanish solution, Francis of Cadiz, approved by dynastic calculators who value safety like misers value small coins. The double wedding of 1846, Isabella to Francis, her sister Luisa Fernanda to the Duke of Montpensier, arrives as an overture scored for organ and rumour drum. Paris and London take their seats with binoculars, Madrid takes sides, pamphlets flutter down like bureaucratic snow. Isabella marries the man the state told her to trust and the state congratulates itself for an act of conservative genius that promptly produces liberal quantities of comedy. He insists on the delicate distinction. What is recorded in ink is that the marriage was tempestuous and sterile in affection. What is recorded in coffee is that the prince consort slept with propriety and the queen slept with insomnia. Enter the decade of moderates, 1844 to 1854, which sounds like a sedative and acts like a bulldog in a waistcoat. Narvaez patrols the corridors with the energy of a headmaster who thinks detention is a love language. The Constitution is massaged into something calmer. Censorships line up their stamps. Public order becomes a hobby with horses. Isabella, young and theatrical, plays her role like an actress determined to be both star and manager. She confers, confirms, corrects with the authority of someone who understands that in Spain, the crown must pretend to control the generals, even as the generals carefully control the pretense. She makes time for processions and for politics, for the Sacred Heart and the very human one, for the confession that takes an hour and the signature that costs her a week. The Bienio Progresista, 1854, arrives like an X with new ideas. Espartero returns, O'Donnell ascends, and the air brightens with promises to shake dust from the velvet curtains. Railways get aristocratic, budgets get adventurous, the disentailment of property continues. A queen who prefers certainty to experimentation, grits porcelain teeth, and performs adaptability with the elegance of a dancer adjusting to a new partner mid-waltz. She knows the choreography of survival. Applaud reforms in public, apply brakes in private, find the person in the room who can keep the chandelier from falling. Almost invariably, that person wears a uniform. O'Donnell's season, 1858, has the gloss of imported cologne. He sounds modern. He reads the map like a gambler's hand. He believes that a busy foreign policy is cheaper than domestic peacekeeping and more photogenic. Morocco offers a war with sand-colored heroism. Tetuan obliges. The press prints engravings where sabers flash and Spain looks like its best self. Santo Domingo, annexed with a flourish, becomes a complicated love affair that costs more than flowers and returns less than gratitude. The Caribbean, like most relationships founded on nostalgia, resists management. The Chincha Islands War, a Pacific adventure with guano overtones, turns strategic excrement into actual excrement with a fleet. Each of these campaigns gives Spain something to read about that isn't its own reflection, and gives Isabella a banner to bless, a dispatch to receive, a general to congratulate in a room where congratulations mean proximity, and proximity means gossip. He pauses over a figure both spectral and solid. Sor Patrocinio, the stigmatic nun whose wounds attracted pilgrims and whose advice reportedly attracted queens. Record, a Franciscan mystic, influential at court, vigorously denounced by critics as a one-woman theocracy. Rumor that she steered ministries the way a dowager steers stare gossip, her bandaged hands leaving prints on portfolios. Then there is her counterweight, Anthony Mary Claret, the missionary archbishop turned confessor, whose sermons hit like tuning forks and whose austerity gave the palace migraines. Record, he guided Isabella's conscience for years, counseled charity and moderation, and became a piñata for anti-clerical anger. Rumor that he served as the moral brake that squealed at the sight of Serrano's boots. He is uninterested in inventing from fog. He simply lets the tableau stand. A queen triangulating between a saint in progress, a general in uniform, and a country in pieces. Now the camarilla, a word that smells of hot wax and cold strategy, ladies of the bedchamber with small hands and large networks, chamberlains who are doors disguised as men, courtiers like José de Salamanca, the businessman aristocrat whose portfolios multiplied faster than his scruples, hovering to translate stock prices into palace conversation. Antonio Maria de Marfori, smooth, indispensable, a human keyhole, develops into the courier of confidence. If you want the queen to know, tell Marfori. If you want the queen to not know, tell Marfori a week later. The machinery hums with small favors, a cousin's promotion, a friend's contract, a rival's exile to somewhere sunny. It is governance by 1,000 needles and an occasional hammer. Children punctuate the plot like season finales. Infanta Isabel, La Chata, arrives in 1851 with the sturdy charisma of someone destined to be loved for being precisely herself. Newspapers make room for optimism because babies are the monarchy's renewable resource. More children follow, as do funerals, because the 19th century is unromantic about infant mortality. Alfonso, in 1857, becomes the future in a cradle, and the future invites genealogical arithmetic served with venom. Who fathered? The question is a cloud that follows the boy like an overzealous parasol. Puig Molto gets penciled into satirical margins. Francis gets erased by snigger. Serrano, by sheer narrative gravity, gets accused of being everywhere. He repeats the historian's refrain. Proof is a different species from plausibility. In Spain, plausibility breeds faster. He dwells on the economy because scandal without context is just dessert without dinner. The railways knit provinces into a country that can gossip at telegraphic speed. Industrialization nibbles at the old estates, creating fortunes with pins in Barcelona and Bilbao, and bankruptcies with titles in Castile. The treasury staggers like a student after 3 masses and a bullfight. The city poor discover that hunger is louder in narrow streets. And yet, the court gleams, tapestries brushed, silver polished. A queen in a mantilla offering alms, while the caricaturists sharpen their knives with the care of barbers. She is generous, meaning she gives money and mercy. She is also Bourbon, meaning she expects loyalty to be a two-way sacrament. Sometimes it is, often it isn't. The late 1860 carry a whiff of electrical storm. After O'Donnell, after Narvaez, after the carousel of ministries that spin until everyone is dizzy, the ground begins to fray. The San Gil Barracks uprising in 1866 is a cough that sounds like pneumonia. General Prim becomes the revolutionary's profile picture, dashing, severe, born to glower at barricades. Admiral Topate summons the fleet with a slogan polished for pamphlets. Serrano, faithless to yesterday, faithful to tomorrow, lends his aura. The Pact of Ostend stitches the opposition together like a suit, cut quickly but well. Isabella, at the Escorial or at San Sebastian, depending on the weekend and the weather, feels the ropes in the ship go taut. She prefers rosaries to ropes, but the country has made other plans. Revolution, when it arrives in 1868, is a triad: ships, proclamations, and a refusal to be impressed by canopies. La Gloriosa sounds benign, like a pastry. It eats dynasties for breakfast. The Queen's departure is both dignified and abrupt, the way a well-trained hostess leaves a table when the table's on fire. She sweeps into exile with trunks that close like the lids of history. Paris receives her with the cool competence of a city that has a concierge for fallen royalty. She rents grace, eats well, prays often, and writes letters so starched they can stand by themselves. The money question becomes eternal. How much is owed a dethroned queen by a country that cannot pay its own shoes? Enough, it turns out, to keep a household trained to curtsy. Exile domesticates her. Freed from the theatre, she becomes more frankly theatrical, makes jokes at her own expense, criticizes ministries like a football pundit, adjusts memory until it flatters. In 1870, she abdicates for the sake of her son, because monarchy, like carpentry, is easier to repair when the plank is young. Spain experiments with the Savoyard king, Amadeo, who arrives with good intentions and leaves with new swear words in Italian. The First Republic flickers like a light bulb, learning to be a lighthouse. Then, in 1874, Martinez Campos rides a horse into history and pronounces the Bourbon Restoration like a cure read from a doctor's note. Alfonso XII returns. The mother smiles. Legitimacy is declared tax deductible. He leans into the texture of her later years, not the headlines, but the wallpaper. She ages with the stubbornness of a candle that refuses to gutter out. Fatigue settles in her bones the way dust settles on carved wood, gently, persistently. She develops, as retirees do, a talent for telling the same story better each time. Visitors leave with a pocket full of adjectives: vain, warm, pious, sly, lonely, surrounded. She divides possessions the way old queens do. Jewelry to this child, anecdotes to that one, resentment stored like wine. The Infanta Isabel becomes the public face of an elder Bourbon gentility that Spain grudgingly finds charming. Alfonso becomes the Restoration's thesis statement until tuberculosis writes its dissent. Isabella outlives some of her myth and none of her appetite for commentary. When she dies in 1904, the obituaries sound like ambivalent hymns. Enough praise and eulogy. He pulls the camera in close to the mechanics of scandal as an instrument. Pamphleteering in Isabella's Spain is an ecosystem with predators, scavengers, and occasional songbirds. Broadsheets with names like La Iberia, El Contemporáneo, La Discusión sell their virtue aggressively and their insinuations gracefully. Satirical weeklies do what social media does now: seize a rumor, simplify it for travel, and attach a drawing that makes the point with cruel efficiency. The Queen's marriage provides the skeleton. The affairs alleged, rumored, embroidered provide the flesh. Politics provides the beating heart. A cartoon of a queen with a guard is not about sex. It is about a ministry the cartoonist hates. An epigram about fetishes is not about lace. It is about the concordat, or the budget, or the appointment that went to the wrong cousin. And then there is the husband, Francis of Cadiz, a man weaponized by wits who never forgave him for being insufficiently mythic. His reputation, once dented, became a tin cup passed around. He was meticulous. He was formal. He was the exact shape of the cage built for him. He collected rituals as others collect stamps. He believed, sincerely, that if everything were done correctly, the weather would improve. He was laughed at in a manner specific to courts, publicly with elegance, privately with knives. Did he prefer lace to leather? The rhetorical question was thrown like a tomato and splashed like ink. The marriage, starved of intimacy and protein, nonetheless produced a line. That was the job. That it produced an archipelago of rumors was the other job, the one Spain never fails to complete. He returns to Serrano because every tale about Isabella eventually does. The Duke moves through frames with the animal confidence of a man whose mirror tells him the truth he prefers. He is made Captain General, Prime Minister, Prince of the Revolution for exactly as long as the revolution needs a prince. He later acts as regent, while Spain shops for a king. His intimacy with Isabella becomes part of both of their resumes. For her, a charge sheet. For him, a myth that adds cheekbones to speeches. He is neither hero nor villain. He is Spain's favorite recurring character, the handsome opportunist who believes in the nation and in his reflection. Not always in that order. He inventories briefly and graciously the rest of the orbit. Ruiz de Arana, the naval officer whose proximity became part of the Puigmalto rumour cloud. Marfori, already credited, who turns velvet into voltage. O'Donnell, always the elegant cavalryman who thought a good war was like a good cologne, improving, not too strong, wearable in public. Narvaez, whose critics called him a dictator until they needed him to dictate the peace. Prim, who glared the monarchy into a corner, then died with the kind of mysterious violence that writes its own pamphlets. Each man, in relation to Isabella, becomes mythic simply because she made people mythic by standing next to them. He pivots to religion not as halo, but as architecture. Spain's 19th century faith is neither hypocrisy nor suffocation. It is a scaffold upon which lives are constructed and by which reputations are weighed. Isabella believed in the sacraments the way a pedestrian believes in bridges. She also used them the way a politician uses stages. Processions moved populations the way trains move freight. Saints' days organized calendars and loyalties. Confessors translated guilt into policy, and back again. Her personal piety, frequent confession, devotions to particular virgins, money for churches was not posturing in the modern sense. It was a language in which she spoke sincerely and strategically. The anti-clerical pamphlets that mocked her as a relic missed the fact that relics, in Spain, are crowd draws and memory devices. She knew. She kept the bracelet of belief on, even when it caught on the furniture of scandal. Because he owes you specificity, he opens the jewelry box of fetish talk without pouring it. Uniforms. Yes, Spain's uniformed class moved through her life the way music moves through a dance hall. Guards with plumes, lancers with braided cords, cavalrymen whose gloves snapped like punctuation. The court imagined the queen as a seeker of epaulettes, the way teenagers imagine the glamorous as seekers of sunglasses. But fetish is often just the slow shorthand of a public trying to explain private choices by props. What she needed, he suggests, were men who could steady the empire's shaking table with one hand while squeaking a rosary with the other. The uniform was not an aphrodisiac. It was a resume written in braid. He checks the ledger of normalcy because the phrase, "this was normal," often gets thrown like a rug over debris. It was not normal in the sense of wholesome. It was normal in the sense of widespread and structurally encouraged. Monarchies traded intimacy for survival constantly. Mistresses built coalitions in France. Favorites stabilized households in Britain. Empresses in Russia were accused of everything, partly because accusation kept the empire entertained. What made Spain's version noisier was the military's permanent presence at the center of the state and the poverty of a public sphere that could digest scandal without becoming malnourished by it. In short, a queen's rumored lovers were not merely gossip, they were factional proxies. To deny or affirm them was to declare for a party. Sex, as ever, served politics like a wink serves a joke, the signal that completes the meaning. He lingers on sense memory because this is a bedtime story and the bed is creaking. Hear the distant ring of a blacksmith shaping a bit while a minister shapes a bill. Smell chocolate thickened with eggs, a royal breakfast, set next to a petition sharpened with resentment. See the royal coach thundering over cobbles slick with last night's rain, while a pamphleteer walks fast to the printer with a cartoon whose caption will live longer than any law. Feel the slipperiness of polished marble under a queen's heels when she moves fast between chapel and council. Taste the penny metal tang of a coin stamped with a monarch's face. Pass through a dozen hungry hands before it arrives at the baker, who looks up at the palace and calls it distant weather. He circles back, because good history is a boomerang, to the opening premise. That power flows along channels obvious and private, sacred and ridiculous. Isabella II did what many monarchs did when their states demanded both theatre and realism. She turned the rooms she could control into offices for the tasks she could not escape. One room had crucifixes and candles, another had maps and ministers, a third had mirrors and men. She triangulated, she improvised. She made mistakes as public as processions, and as private as any humans, scaled up to monarchy size. Spain, famously judgmental and famously forgiving in alternating seasons, punished and then restored the line that produced her. Later, under Alfonso XII and then XIII, under Primo de Rivera, under the Republic and the Civil War and the long dictatorship, Spaniards would revisit Isabella's century with that peculiar Iberian blend of nostalgia and side-eye. He leaves you, finally, with a closing that lands softly but not sentimentally. Imagine a long corridor in the royal palace after midnight. The lamps are turned low, the portraits doze, the Bourbon lips still pursed in ancestral patience. A cleaning woman's bucket squeaks in a corner. Somewhere, a guard coughs. On a table, someone has left a devotional card of the Virgin and, next to it, a folded report about railway tariffs. Lay across both, casual as a sigh, a general's glove, single, black, perfectly fitted to a hand that has touched sabers and doorknobs, blessings and betrayals. In that still life lies her reign, piety, paperwork, and the perpetual presence of the uniform. The lesson is not clean. It never is. History is a mattress with lumpy springs. You can smooth the coverlet, but you always feel what's beneath. Blow out the candle with care. The smoke curls like a pamphlet's headline. Sleep, if you can.